Disclaimer: this content is intended for a mature audience only. Viewer discretion is advised. The room was quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but heavy, as though it was carrying secrets it had been holding for far too long. A lamp glowed faintly in the corner, painting the walls in honey-colored light, soft but unyielding. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, pressing in on you, waiting for something to break it. And that night, it did. I lay across the bed, feeling the weight of my own thoughts pressing me down. Thoughts of love, of longing, of the way marriage can feel like both a sanctuary and a storm. He moved closer. My husband, my anchor, my mirror, my mystery. There was something in the way he carried himself that evening, something unspoken but deeply understood. His presence filled the air, and without a word, the energy between us shifted. We had been together long enough to know each other's scars, yet there were still moments when it felt like we were rediscovering new parts of ourselves through the other. That duality, the comfort of the familiar and the thrill of the unknown, was what made nights like these linger in my chest. I could feel his hand brush against me, gentle, cautious, but charged with an intensity that betrayed restraint. The quiet tension was almost unbearable. My breath caught as I felt the space narrow between us, as though the entire room was conspiring to draw us closer together. And yet, beneath the surface of desire, there was something else, something harder to name. A question of trust. A surrender. An aching need to let go of everything outside that room. But the deeper truth pulsed just beneath my skin: love, real love, is never only soft. It tests you, it pushes you, it asks if you are willing to be vulnerable enough to be seen. In that fragile, flickering moment, I wondered if I was ready for what he was asking of me without words. And then, just as the silence fractured, just as the distance threatened to disappear, everything paused. Time held its breath. I did too. What happened next would change the way I looked at him, at us, forever. The pause lingered like a held breath between us. His shadow stretched over me, long and deliberate, as if even the walls were watching. In that quiet, I became acutely aware of how much we had carried into this moment, the years of love, of promises, of silent disappointments tucked behind smiles. He wasn't only my husband, he was the man who had seen me at my brightest and at my breaking points. He had witnessed the mornings when I couldn't find words for my own restlessness, and the nights when I pretended I was fine just to keep the peace. And still, here he was, hovering close, as though he had no intention of leaving me alone with the weight of myself. His hand brushed the small of my back, grounding me. It wasn't only a touch, it was a question. Do you trust me enough to let go? I wanted to answer yes, but the truth was layered. My trust had been tested before, not only by him but by life itself. Trust, I had learned, was not a one-time gift. It was something fragile, rebuilt in quiet choices, in small gestures, in nights like this. I turned my face slightly, not enough to meet his eyes but enough to feel his breath near my skin. The air thickened. My chest tightened with the ache of wanting and the fear of surrender. He wasn't rushing me. He never did. But there was a steady insistence in the way he lingered, a wordless reminder that closeness, real closeness, demands courage. I thought of the girl I had once been, reckless, hungry for love, afraid of being unseen. And the woman I had become, measured, careful, yet still aching for a depth that routine couldn't touch. That woman wanted to reach for him now, to close the gap, to let the silence break into something irreversibly intimate. But just before I could, he whispered my name, so softly it barely rose above the hum of the lamp. Something in his tone made my pulse falter. It wasn't desire alone, it was something heavier, something that sounded dangerously close to confession. And in that instant, I realized, whatever he was about to reveal would test not only my heart but the very foundation of us. The way he spoke my name lingered in the air, trembling like a note struck on an old piano, low, resonant, impossible to ignore. I froze, not out of fear, but because I knew that voice carried something I had been both waiting for and dreading. It wasn't just affection, it was history. 1,000 unspoken words pressed into one fragile syllable. I thought of our beginning, when we were younger and reckless, when love felt like running barefoot into the rain without worrying about thunder. Back then, everything between us was urgent, every touch a declaration, every promise a vow carved into stone. But time has a way of softening stone, of turning it into sand that slips quietly between your fingers if you're not careful. There were days I wondered if he noticed the way my laughter had grown quieter, or the way I lingered longer in solitude, hiding in the folds of routine. And there were nights I felt the distance in his silence, even as he lay only inches away. Yet here, in this charged moment, I could feel that distance narrowing, collapsing under the weight of everything unsaid. His hand traced the curve of my shoulder, not rushed, but deliberate. The gentleness of it nearly unraveled me. It reminded me of the night he held me after my father's funeral, when words had failed but his presence had spoken everything. It reminded me of the years he carried my doubts without complaint, as though he believed my storms were worth weathering. And yet, not all storms pass cleanly. There was the time he came home late, eyes shadowed with secrets he never confessed. The night I asked if something was wrong, and he kissed me instead of answering. I had let it go then, but the memory still pulsed beneath my skin, shaping the way I felt his touch now, equal parts comfort and question. I wanted to turn, to demand answers, but desire tangled with hesitation, keeping me suspended between longing and doubt. His breath grazed my ear as if he was about to speak again, and my pulse raced in anticipation. What would he confess? What truth would surface here, in the quiet vulnerability of our bed, that might change everything we thought we knew about love? The silence stretched, heavy, trembling, waiting to break. His silence pressed harder than any words could. Hovering so close, he seemed to tremble with something he could no longer contain, and yet he held it back, as though he feared that once spoken, it could not be undone. The air between us thickened, a fragile thread straining under the weight of both desire and truth. I closed my eyes, pretending for a moment that his touch was enough. That the warmth of his palm at my shoulder, the steadiness of his breath against my neck, could erase the doubts coiled tight in my chest. But my body betrayed me. I could feel the sharp rise of my pulse, the restless ache of wanting to believe him, wanting to believe us. He leaned lower, his lips so close to my skin I could almost taste the words he had yet to say. And still, he held back. That hesitation burned hotter than any embrace. It told me he was caught too, tangled in his own storm of need and restraint, of honesty and fear. I wanted to ask, "What are you hiding from me?" But the question stayed locked behind my teeth. Because what if the answer shattered more than it healed? What if it wasn't about betrayal at all, but about the parts of himself he had kept hidden, not to hurt me, but because he couldn't yet bear to reveal them? His hand moved lower, tracing the curve of my waist, gentle but unrelenting, as if asking me to surrender not just my body but my defenses. My breath hitched, caught between resistance and release. The intimacy of that touch carried an ache beyond physical. It demanded my trust, my willingness to open old wounds for the chance of something deeper. "Say something," I whispered finally, my voice trembling against the silence. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pressed his forehead lightly against the back of my shoulder, his body folding into mine as though words had failed him completely. And in that fragile closeness, I realized he was fighting himself as much as I was. What was stronger, the love that held us together, or the secrets that threatened to pull us apart? The lamp flickered once, and the room seemed to lean into the moment, waiting for what neither of us dared to speak. His forehead still pressed against my shoulder. I felt the weight of his breath tremble against my skin, uneven, heavy, almost burdened. I thought he was about to finally confess, to release whatever secret had been gnawing at him. But instead, he whispered something I hadn't expected, something that cut through the silence like glass shattering on stone. "I don't know if I deserve you." The words hung in the air, fragile and devastating. My body stiffened, not from anger but from the sudden unraveling of every assumption I had made about this moment. I had prepared myself for betrayal, for confessions of mistakes made in the dark. But not this. Not his doubt. I turned slightly, just enough to see his eyes in the amber light. They were wet, restless, carrying the kind of sorrow that doesn't come from a single wound but from years of quiet erosion. And for the first time in so long, I realized he wasn't the only one holding secrets. Because hadn't I, too, questioned us in the quiet corners of my mind? Hadn't I wondered if love was enough to keep two restless souls bound when the weight of life pressed down heavier each year? I had buried those thoughts, disguised them in routines, smoothed them over with smiles. But his confession cracked me open, forcing me to confront the truth I had carefully hidden even from myself. The ache between us deepened, shifting from the physical to the raw, unguarded space where honesty lives. His hand lingered at my waist, as though he was afraid I might slip away if he let go. And in that grip, I felt his fear, not of losing me to another, but of losing me to the distance that had quietly grown between us. For a heartbeat, I wanted to reassure him, to whisper that he was enough, that love was still alive here in this room. But another part of me, the honest part, hesitated. Because I wasn't certain. Because sometimes, love wasn't about certainty at all, but about standing together in the terrifying absence of it. And so I said nothing. I let the silence answer for me. His eyes searched mine, desperate, as if waiting for a verdict that I couldn't yet give. And in that unresolved space, the storm outside broke into rain, drumming against the window, echoing the chaos inside us both. The rain outside deepened, steady and relentless, as though the sky itself had chosen to witness us. His words, "I don't know if I deserve you," still echoed in the room, fragile but immovable. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence was no longer just heavy, it was alive, pulsing with every unspoken truth we had both been too afraid to name. Finally, I turned fully to face him. His eyes, raw and unguarded, met mine with a kind of desperation I hadn't seen in years. And in that look, I understood. This wasn't about betrayal or distance. It was about fear, the quiet, invisible fear that creeps in when love lasts long enough to know how much you stand to lose. "You don't have to deserve me," I whispered, my voice trembling as much as his hands. "You only have to choose me. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." His grip tightened, not possessive but pleading, as if my words had struck a chord he'd long been waiting to hear. For a moment, I thought the tension would dissolve into relief. But then, his gaze shifted, breaking away, and a shadow passed over his face. There was a time, he admitted quietly, when I almost didn't. When the weight of everything, work, silence, my own mistakes, nearly pulled me away from you. I never crossed that line, but I stood too close to it. The confession hit like lightning, sudden, searing, but instead of breaking me, it clarified everything. He hadn't betrayed me with his body, but with his silence, his retreat into shadows when I needed his light. And in truth, I had done the same, retreating into my doubts, my loneliness, without ever letting him see. We were guilty, not of leaving, but of almost. Of nearly forgetting that love isn't about perfection, but about the choice to keep returning to each other even after the storms. Tears welled, unashamed. I touched his face, letting my thumb trace the line of his jaw. "Then let's stop almost," I said softly. "Let's stop leaving each other in the quiet." His breath shuddered out of him, and for the first time that night, his arms closed around me fully, no hesitation, no distance left between us. The rain eased into a softer rhythm, as though the world itself was exhaling with us. And in that fragile, trembling embrace, I knew, love had not ended. It had only begun again. The rain slowed to a hush, a quiet percussion against the window as dawn's first light began to soften the edges of the night. We lay there together, no longer divided by silence or fear, but joined by the fragile honesty we had finally allowed to breathe between us. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't waiting for him to speak, nor was he searching for the right words to fill the space. The quiet was no longer heavy, it was whole. His hand rested over mine, fingers threaded gently, not as possession but as promise. We had confessed, we had faltered, but we had not let go. And that, I realized, was what love truly was, not the absence of storms, but the choice to stand in them side by side, unflinching. I thought of the woman I had been before this night, guarded, restless, afraid of what I might uncover if I listened too closely to my doubts. She was still a part of me, but she no longer defined me. And as I looked at him, at the lines of worry etched deep around his eyes, I saw a man who had been carrying more than he ever allowed me to see. Vulnerable, imperfect, but still reaching for me even when it would have been easier to turn away. He kissed the crown of my head softly, a gesture so simple yet so profound it anchored me to him all over again. "We'll do better," he murmured. It wasn't a vow carved in stone, but it didn't need to be. It was enough. Through the open window, the world smelled of rain and renewal. The night had ended, but something in us had just begun anew. I closed my eyes, letting that truth settle into me like warmth, like light after darkness. Because in the end, it wasn't about who we had almost lost, or the distance we had almost let grow. It was about the way we found each other again, fragile, flawed, but still choosing. Always choosing. And perhaps that is the only kind of love that lasts. Love does not survive because it is perfect, it survives because, even in the storm, we choose to stay.